I have been requested to speak of a land acknowledgement. Can you hear me now? So this is the Massachusetts Ponkapog tribe. I would like to begin today by acknowledging the Massachusetts tribe, the tribe of indigenous people from whom the colony, province, and Commonwealth of Massachusetts have taken their name, and to pay respect and honor to our ancestors from the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapog, who were the original inhabitants of the town of Bridgewater. During colonial times, members of the Wampanoag tribe came here to live as well. Both tribes have continued to live here and throughout southeastern Massachusetts today. Thank you. So now, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first Juneteenth flag raising. My name is Janise Campbell-Means. I chair the Bridgewater Communities for Civil Rights, and I'm one of the co-chairs for the Juneteenth Planning Committee. Thank you all for coming out today. I grew up in Bridgewater from kindergarten all the way to high school, the old high school, and I honestly have to say, this does something to my soul, because I never thought I would see this day here in Bridgewater, so I am so thankful. Okay. We will start with Erik Moore, the Vice President of the Town Council, who will read the resolution on the recognition of Juneteenth.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm honored to be here presenting Resolution R FY 22-008. This resolution was adopted by unanimous vote of all members of the Bridgewater Town Council on May 10th, 2022. A resolution honoring Juneteenth. Whereas on June 19th, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger of the Union Army announced to the people of Texas that the Emancipation Proclamation was in effect, freeing enslaved people in the Confederate States. And whereas on June 19th, 2020, Governor Charlie Baker issued a proclamation declaring that date as Juneteenth Independence Day in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And whereas on May 2021, the town of Bridgewater denounced any form of racism, discrimination, or intolerance as a threat to the safety and well-being of the public, and designated June 19th as a town holiday. Whereas on June 19th, 2021, the first annual Juneteenth celebration in the town of Bridgewater was held. And now, therefore, the Bridgewater Town Council declares June 19th, 2022 a day of commemoration and celebration, and once again fully supports the Juneteenth flag to be flown with the United States flag in front of the Academy Building in the town of Bridgewater for the weeks of June 15th through the 30th, 2022.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. So now if everybody would turn to the rising of the Juneteenth flag. Our next speakers will be two BR students who will speak together. The first one is Felicia DeJesus, who goes by Fifi. And next to her is Isabel Andre. Let me see, Fifi is a 10th grade student at Bridgewater, Rainham. Felicia and her family moved from Brockton when she was in the 4th grade to Rainham. Felicia is a student leader at Bridgewater, Rainham, and has spoken at multiple events, including the Staff Professional Development District-wide Student Leader Voices panel held last September, as well as the High School Expression Sessions group. Outside of school, Felicia enjoys spending time with her family and friends and works part-time at Dunkin' Donuts. After she graduates, Felicia wants to pursue her education by earning her master's degree in psychology. The next is Isabel Andre, standing next to her, who is also attends BR and is a 10th grade student at Bridgewater, Rainham. Izzy and her family moved from Medfield, Mass. when she was 13 years old. Izzy is a student at Bridgewater, Rainham, and has spoken at multiple events, including the Staff Professional Development District-wide Student Leader Voices panel held last September, as well as the High School Expression Session group. Izzy also serves as a key member on the BR's Next Step team. Here's her plug. They will be performing on Sunday, June 19th in Brockton at their Juneteenth celebration. Outside of school, Izzy enjoys spending time with friends and family, as well as working part-time at IHOP. After she graduates, Izzy wants to pursue a career in law enforcement with the goal of becoming either a detective or an attorney. Ladies and gentlemen, Fifi and...
You ready? Good afternoon. I'm Isabel Andre.
And I am Felicia DeJesus. Today we will be speaking about the history behind Juneteenth.
June 19th, 1865 marks the day of all enslaved people being free.
Although some may say that enslaved were free when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued on January 1st, 1863, that is not the case.
We celebrate the trials that our ancestors went through in order to get to where we are today.
Juneteenth is also a way to celebrate African American culture.
After years of being enslaved, our people finally got the freedom they deserve on that day.
Even though President Biden declared this day to be a national holiday, does not mean it should be seen only as that, a holiday.
It's much more than a holiday or a day off from school.
Getting freedom was the first step.
The second was to find a way to live with all these obstacles against them.
They had to go through so many clauses to prevent them from voting.
They had to go through segregation.
They had to go through racist remarks from everyone.
Even with all these drawbacks, they still persevered.
It is freedom.
It is giving basic human rights to people.
It is fearless.
It is inspiring, and most of all, it defines our history with this country.
We knew of Juneteenth, but we didn't know the whole story of it.
So this speech was also a good way for us to learn something new.
Juneteenth means freedom and a day to remember.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to us.
We hope you have a great day.
Isn't it nice to have young people come and hear it from their point of view? Yes. Thank you, Fifi and Isabella. Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Jeanne Foster. Jeanne Oliver Foster is originally from New Bedford and is a 1977 graduate of Bridgewater State University with a bachelor's degree in elementary education and music. She received her master's degree in communications media from Fitchburg State University in 2006 with a focus on film and video production for educational purposes. In 1990, Jeanne co-founded the Afro-American Alumni Association at Bridgewater State University, which is celebrating more than 30 years on campus, supporting student events and career mentoring. In 2020, Jeanne served as vice president of this organization, which actively supported the renaming of the BSU Center for Multicultural Affairs to the Sarah Lewis and Paul L. Gaines Senior Center for Inclusion and Equity, recognizing the first Black graduate from 1867 and first Black administrator hired to recruit and support students of color at BSU in 1968. Jeanne celebrates African American, Cape Verdean, and Native American heritage, and is a member of the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapog. She recently retired in 2019 after 42 years of teaching in Boston and Brockton schools. Jeanne and her husband, James Foster, a professional musician and instructor, have been married for nearly 42 years, have 3 daughters, 4 grandchildren, and presently reside in Taunton. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeanne Foster.
Thank you very much for that introduction and for the land acknowledgement, which I so appreciate. And our tribe has worked for years to educate and help others know that we are still here. So as you know, my name is Jeanne Oliver Foster, and you've heard my background. I'm very honored to be able to be in this position to speak to you today on this very historic occasion of raising the Juneteenth flag in your town square here in Bridgewater. I'm going to tell you just a little bit more about the Juneteenth holiday. On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln did sign into law the Emancipation Proclamation, and that was obeyed through most of the United States. However, in the state of Texas, those slave owners refused to let their slaves go free. It wasn't until 2,000 Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865, 2 years later than the actual law, that those slaves, 250,000 of them, became free. This date became known as Juneteenth Day in the United States. June 19th, 2022 marks the second anniversary of this celebration. So now I'd like to tell you a little bit about my experiences here in Bridgewater as a student in the year 1973 when I was a freshman. Now, when I arrived here, the general belief was that Bridgewater was mostly a town of European descent, and that there were really very few, if any, families of African descent living here. But I came to know a few of those families. Maybe some of you know them as well. The first family, Richard and Gloria Stanton. Do any of you know who that family is? You might remember her as being a teacher at the Hunt Elementary School. In later years, she became the principal, the first and only principal at the new Burnell School on campus at Bridgewater State University. So she and her family have been here for decades. Another family, BSU professor, Dr. Robert Daniel and his wife, they came here in the 60s, and he became the first African-American faculty member, professor at Bridgewater, and his wife was a teacher in Bridgewater Public Schools as well. They lived here for decades at that time. A few other families that I've come to know, Shirley Phillips, Doris Campbell, Paul and Sheila Bracy, each have lived here for many years, and they are members of the Bridgewater Commission, Communities for Civil Rights. One more family I'd like to share is the Sockham of my tribe, Gilbert Solomon, has lived in Bridgewater with his wife and raised his children. Of course, they're all grown by now, but he still lives here for decades. And he is the Sockham, the current Sockham of the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapog. Now, in 2018, which is the most recent census for the town of Bridgewater, it is recorded that there were 27,400 residents, voting residents, that lived here. Now, if those 6 families, amounting to about 30 people, that would mean that for every one person of color, there were 1,000 other residents that lived here, 1 to every 1,000. And that was during the 1970s. It made me wonder, well, what happened in the earlier years before I came here? And there are 2 associate professors at Bridgewater State University, Dr. Emily Field and Dr. Jamie Huff, who had the same question in their minds. And they are professors who teach in the African American Studies program, which is a new program and a new major or a minor at Bridgewater in the past few years. Dr. Field teaches English and specializes in African American literature, while Dr. Huff teaches courses in criminal justice. And they together have been researching through the archives of the town of Bridgewater, including East and West Bridgewater, because those 3 used to be one town. And North Bridgewater became the city of Brockton, so that became a whole nother territory. Their initial discoveries included evidence about formerly enslaved people who are buried in First Cemetery right on the BSU campus. Once examining the archival records of the town of Bridgewater, these professors found the records of both African American and indigenous people. Although they were 2 distinct cultures, the lives of these of the African Americans and indigenous people were very deeply intertwined from mixed marriages, which was a common practice during the 1700s. So far, Drs. Field and Huff have compiled a database of over 470 people of color who lived in Bridgewater during the 1700s and 1800s. That includes about 70 people that are designated as Indian or Native American during those years. Some indigenous names that are listed in the archives have the name Ponkapog as the place of birth. And that is in reference to the Massachusetts tribe, which my part of the Massachusetts tribe, our part, was originally, our ancestral lands were in Quincy, and the entire tribe of our ancestors was removed to the town of Canton, which in earlier years was called Ponkapog Plantation. So we know that some of the members of our ancestors lived here as well. One particular indigenous person in the vital records was a man from the Massachusetts tribe named Toby Talbot, about whom Drs. Field and Huff have done considerable research. And you'll hear more about him, but I'm going to tell you just a little bit today. Toby was an enslaved man who won an emancipation lawsuit in 1779. That was 84 years before the Emancipation Proclamation. And he died after he became free. He lived in Bridgewater for 36 years, and he died in 1815 at the age of 94. And he's buried in First Cemetery in an unmarked grave. So I'm saying all of that to say that although the town of Bridgewater probably has traditionally been described as almost exclusively European, the research of Drs. Emily Field and Jamie Huff, along with the raising of today's Juneteenth flag, are meaningful and significant steps towards recognizing the records of these African American and Native American people, and we hope that will lead to them publicly and visually being represented somewhere in Bridgewater with signage, hopefully, that will help tell some of the history of these people, where all of the citizens in the town of Bridgewater will be able to know that African Americans and Native Americans have been a big part of the story of Bridgewater, even fighting in the American Revolutionary War. If you would like more information about the Massachusetts tribe, we have a website that is www.massachusettstribe.org. Thank you so much for being here for this historic occasion, and you have a blessed day.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you so much. Our next speaker happens to be Means. Yep, my son. He is a college graduate of Franklin Pierce, class of 2019. He majored in psychology and minored in history. He's striving to be a teacher. He presently is working at the New England Center for Children, and he just found out last night that he was nominated for a Special Education Parent Advisory Council Award. Ladies and gentlemen, Means.
Hello. The raising of the Juneteenth flag means a lot to me as a black man in America. In my everyday life, I constantly see many different flags. I see the American flag the most, but I see many others, such as the Massachusetts state flag, the Irish flag, and currently the Ukrainian flag. The LGBTQ flag is also shown and flown on many cars and placed in stores and restaurants. On occasion, I see the Mexican or the Puerto Rican flag while driving around town. I also see the American flag depicted in many ways, such as all black and white with one blue stripe, or even the Confederate flag that represents a time from America's past. All of these flags mean something powerful to the groups and people that have flown or shown them. Growing up, I rarely, if not ever, saw any black or African flags being shown or represented in my community. I saw images of the Black Panther flag in some textbooks and shown in documentaries. There are people out there that depict the Black Panthers as a violent or malicious group, but I never saw them that way. I viewed them as a group that helped provide children lunches before school, which led to many of the free breakfast programs that we have today. I always thought they deserved to have the flag being flown in public, but I would still say today is not considered socially acceptable. I know that if I told my mother I was going to attach a flag to my car and drive around town, she would be concerned for my safety and tell me it's not a good idea. There are many flags that are flown in communities, but I rarely, if ever, seen a black or African flag. I see a lot of Black Lives Matter signs in communities, but they do not really take action. To be raising the Juneteenth flag is a great thing to do for a community. It acknowledges the history that shouldn't be forgotten and tremendous achievement for America. There are people out there that view Juneteenth as a political holiday and would not celebrate it or even acknowledge it for that reason, but that is not the case. Juneteenth is a celebration for freedom for the slaves in Galveston, Texas, and nothing is more American than freedom. So embracing Juneteenth as an American, not just black holiday, is a great step forward to achieving Dr. Martin Luther King's dream of social integration. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, our next speaker is Paul Bracy. Paul is a human relations educator and consultant. He has over 50 years of experience developing and delivering educational training programs to corporations, institutions, and governmental organizations both nationally and internationally. During his 21-year career in the United States Air Force, Paul developed and led the military's race relations educational program for 12,000 military and civilian employees. While assigned to Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa, Japan during the 1970s. During his career in the military service, Paul was twice awarded the Air Force Commendation Medal for outstanding performance and leadership. Upon retiring in 1978 from military service, Paul continued his human relations career through working with a variety of diversity and inclusion consulting firms and his own firm, Collaborative Strategies, Inc., under his second retirement in 2009. Paul was also a community outreach coordinator for the Adolescent Violence Prevention Project in Boston, Mass., working with community agencies and delivering violence prevention education across the communities of Boston. He opened the first in the nation Office of Adolescent Violence Prevention at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. In 1989, Paul co-founded and was the first president of Concerned Black Men of Massachusetts. Paul came out of retirement in 2016, founded and is president of the Doc C. Bracy Center for Human Reconciliation. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Bracy.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay. If you come from where I come from, when you say good afternoon, you expect a response, not people to just sit there. So I'm going to do it again. Good afternoon. Okay. That sounds better. I want to thank Jenise for the kind introduction. I also want to thank the town of Bridgewater, the Bridgewater Communities for Civil Rights organization, of which I am a member, and the organizers of this day of remembrance, and having the honor to speak to you. Make no mistake, this is not a minor event, and neither was the raising of the pride flag. Bridgewater is making a statement that it is a community of inclusion. Yeah. Now, there are some contradictions about Juneteenth, and I'm going to bring those about, even though some people have already made comments about what I was going to do, and I know they didn't see my comments. So if there's repetitive, that's what it is. Okay. June 19th, 1865. Before I go there, I want you to think about the contradictions today. We've raised a flag. It's a national holiday, and there are folks who are trying to deny, to ban this kind of education in our schools. Those are the kind of contradictions I'm talking about when we talk about Juneteenth. So, June 19th, 1865, the day enslaved people in Texas found out that they had been emancipated. Emancipation, free from legal, social, and political restrictions. If you know our history, that never happened. A day, a moment of celebration 2.5 years after the proclamation had been announced. There's no doubt that the people in Texas that found out were happy and were excited about what had taken place. That's not necessarily true for the other folks. This was not a congressional act. Rather, it is a wartime proclamation by President Lincoln as Commander-in-Chief. Now, you need to understand, he couldn't have done this if it wasn't a war going on, okay? Which affected only the states that had rebelled from the United States. Border southern states who sided with the Union were not included in the proclamation. So here again is an indication that this was not an apology necessarily. Thus, slavery continued in these states until the passage of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. The proclamation was not an apology, it was a political act. Why did it take so long in Texas? Well, plantation owners had to decide when and how to announce the news, or wait for a government agent to arrive, and that's what was mentioned already about General Granger. And it was common for them to delay that knowledge to people until after the harvest. The other thing that's interesting about this history, people from Mississippi and Tennessee and other southern states migrated to Texas. There was something like 150,000 enslaved people that were taken from those states and into Texas. Probably the most important aspects of the proclamation were it allowed formerly enslaved people to search for their family members who had been separated from them. The right to marry, the right to have a first and last name. However, the tyranny of racial oppression did not stop and has continued to this day. When people tried to escape their plantations, in some cases they were shot. So this was not an awakening, if you will. The Juneteenth flag raising, the national recognition, the community celebrations ring hollow without atonement. This country has yet to atone for the near annihilation of indigenous people, the dislocation of Mexicans who resided in this country before the arrival of Europeans, and the enslavement of Africans. What is required is the same kind of personal commitment, vision, and persistence displayed by those who are no longer enslaved. We can transform our society and make real what we ask our children to believe when they pledge allegiance to our flag every day at school, with liberty and justice for all. We can do that. I created the Doc C. Bracy Center for Human Reconciliation because I believe atonement can happen. And what is atonement? It's not just an apology. It takes responsible for the harm that was done and commits to fix it. And that's one of the things that I appreciated. My wife is Jewish, so I went to a lot of Jewish celebrations. And the Day of Atonement, I started to understand the importance of that. That's not an apology. It's much deeper than that. It's a heartfelt commitment to make a difference. Atonement gives us the opportunity to remove the shackles of white supremacy from both the oppressed groups and the oppressor group. We can do that. And some people don't understand. We are all caught up in this. Nobody escaped what happened and what is going on today. And if you're paying attention, we're in a very dangerous time in our country, which stems from this period of time. The lack of acceptance that we are all one family. We can do this. We can fix it. It's our commitment. So I would say to you, enjoy the upcoming celebration of Juneteenth and make a personal commitment to be part of the solution. As Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see in the world. Be the change you want to see in our country. Be the change you want to see in Bridgewater. We have the power to do that. What we may lack is the commitment. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the honor of speaking to you today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that speech, Paul. So a couple of things before we end. Jeannie Foster has spoke about Toby Talbot. You can actually go to the Bridgewater Communities for Civil Rights website to listen to the recording by Dr. Huff and Dr. Field, where she talks about Toby Talbot and others. Everybody, please go back to the Juneteenth table and get a flyer to remind yourself to go on Saturday down to 50 School Street on the grounds of UU Church for our second Juneteenth celebration. So in closing, I would like to thank Erik Moore for reading the resolution. I would like to thank the town manager, Michael Dutton, and the assistant town manager, Kimberly Williams, who is not here, and all of the town council who unanimously voted to pass the resolution. I would like to thank all of the speakers for their passionate speeches, members of BCCR, members of Juneteenth, all members of Juneteenth, BCCR, Michael Dutton, Kimberly Williams, have all made this day possible. I'd like to thank the police officer in the back who's keeping us safe in our space, and for all of you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to come and help celebrate the rising of the Juneteenth flag. Thank you all so very much.